Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome to the 2024 Celebrating the Sacred Feminine, brought to you by the ISKCON Vaishnavi Ministry. Today, we are joined by Krishnarupa Devi Dasi, all the way from the idyllic community of New Govardhan in Murwillumbah. In Bhagavad Gita, chapter 10, verse number 34, Krishna explains various ways that we can see him in the material world. And this verse focuses on 7 qualities of the feminine. And they're listed within this verse. And that's why in this campaign, we are celebrating the sacred feminine. And we are using this specific verse as our base. And how we can deepen the qualities listed in this verse to deepen our relationship with Krishna. And also to strengthen our movement as well. So there's 7 qualities listed in this verse, and it would be way too vast to cover them all in one talk. So the ISKCON Vaishnavi Ministry has divided up the 7 qualities, and we are having a discussion on each quality. Today, we are going to be talking about the quality of intelligence. And I'm so lucky to be joined by Krishnarupa Devi Dasi to discuss this quality with me today. How are you doing, Krishnarupa?
Hare Krishna Prabhu. I'm doing very well and very excited to be having this discussion with you. When I was asked by the International Vaishnavi Ministry to speak on one of these 7 qualities, of course, being someone who always takes on lots of challenges, I said, I'd like because it's a very interesting verse. And the topic of intelligence in women in our society, in our International Society of Krishna Consciousness, is one that's quite a hot topic. So I picked that one.
I think you and I are aligned in that way. We both like a challenge, don't we? And so it's only natural that you would pick that one. And I think you're the perfect speaker for this quality. So just for some of the viewers, I'd love to share a little bit about you, Krishnarupa, for some of the viewers that may have not come across you before, okay? So Krishnarupa is a member of the Australian National Council and has been a women's minister for ISKCON since 2016. And she has been in this service for a number of years, and she has developed local women's representative branches across Australia. So she supports Vaishnavis in general in lots of different ways. So there's lots and lots of services here. Krishnarupa gives ongoing advice and care for the women in temples and internationally across Australia. She first joined the Melbourne Temple in 1972 and was a resident there for a short period of time. She has had the good fortune of meeting the founder of Acharya, His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada, for the first time in early 1973. So she fulfilled her childhood wish of wanting to visit India, and she traveled throughout Southeast Asia, and then she reached India in 1974 and went to Raman Reti in Vrindavan. And there, amongst, the veil that is Vrindavan and the challenges of Vrindavan, she came across the construction site of the Krishna Balaram Mandir. Wow, that's amazing. Such a formative time. Krishnarupa has attended the first ever International Gaura Purnim Festival in Mayapur, and she settled in the Kolkata temple. In August 1974, Krishnarupa received first and second initiation simultaneously from His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada, on Janmashtami in Vrindavan. Jai, wow, amazing. She returned to Kolkata and was a pujari and a seamstress for Jagannath, Baladev and Subhadra until the mid-1975. So from there onwards until the early 1980s, Krishnarupa was settled in Mayapur, and her main service was to be the seamstress for Radha Madhava, along caring for a number of young Bengali children. Wow. In 1978, she married and later had 3 sons, and the first 2 sons were born in Mayapur. In early 1980s, Krishnarupa and her family moved to Sydney and settled there. For more than 2 decades, she's worked professionally in the publishing industry. In 2014, Krishnarupa has settled in New Govardhan in Murwillumbah, and it's a beautiful community in the border of northern New South Wales, between New South Wales and Queensland. And she lives very close to the temple, and her focus is on devotee care and spiritual well-being in the community, particularly amongst the Vaishnavis. And I can honestly say from personal experience, she does such an amazing job at that. She's given me personal support also. She has developed a number of workshops, such as the identification and prevention of sexual harassment, Harmony in the Home, which is a seminar and a course about raising awareness of domestic violence and its impact on society. And she's presented this, in person, through Zoom, and internationally to, all sorts of countries from Australia, Russia, South Africa, North America. The importance of women in ISKCON is a popular topic that Krishnarupa talks on, and Vaishnava etiquette as well. The predictions in the Sastra, an exploration of how Srila Prabhupada's appearance in the advent of the Western world was predicted in ancient scriptures. So lots of really big, vast topics here. Krishnarupa has attended many professional courses and workshops on domestic and family violence and trauma. So she's had lots and lots of trainings, and then she's brought all that wonderful wisdom into ISKCON to help the community. And Krishnarupa has attended many workshops, government-related workshops on trauma-sensitive practice, working with complex trauma, and all kind of training programs pertaining to those kind of issues in society. She works closely with professionals in the area, both devotee and non-devotee, experts, and just people on the ground volunteering, and she's engaged in in-depth individual research. In addition, she has written a protocol manual for ISKCON Australia's managers to help guide them in how they react and respond to situations where there may be domestic violence, sexual harassment, bullying, or child abuse in a devotee community. So that's very much needed. And lastly, Krishnarupa, last but not least, is also a member of the Sabha, Spiritual Advisors of the Bhagavat Assembly, a body which closely works with the GBC and ISKCON members, kind of as a bridge. And she kind of advises as an advisory board to the GBC. That's the function of the Sabha. And she is also a facilitator of the ERP, Editing Review Panel, a group formed by the GBC and the BBT to review how we edit Prabhupada's books. So thank you so much for listening to that. There is just so many different services that Krishnarupa does, and I just wanted to share a couple of them with you before we get started. It's amazing, Krishnarupa, so many different functions in devotee care.
That's what happens when you stick around for a long time. You get to do lots of different services.
I was wondering,
none of them very well, but anyway, I try.
No, they really are very much needed. I really like the one about the manual that you made, because that then helps other yatras when you can't sort of get to them or teach a course, that there's a manual for yatras on how to respond to certain situations. So I was wondering, would you lead us through the Prabhupada Pranam mantras?
Yes, of course. We can move to the slide where we've got Srila Prabhupada there. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namani Namaste Sarasvati Deve Gauravani Pacharane Nirvisesa Sunyavari Paskachadi Zatarane Om Gyana Timurandasya Ganangana Shalakaya Chakshuan Militam Jena Tasmae Sri Gurave Namaha. Jai Srila Prabhupada.
Jai Srila Prabhupada. Thank you so much for that, Krishnarupa. So I am going to dive in, because this is a really, really big, hotly discussed topic, not just in ISKCON, but in the wider society as well. We're discussing the quality of intelligence today. So why is it important in 2024, in our current times, to discuss these the different attributes that are described in this verse of chapter 10, shloka number 34?
Well, it's incredibly important, Abhidaya, and very, very good question. So when I was asked to discuss, well, I had a choice, as I said before, of which verse I would like. And I chose this particular verse with the theme of celebrating the sacred feminine. So I thought actually how relevant this particular attribute of intelligence is for the members of ISKCON, and how often there are so many understandings about the intelligence of women. We can see sometimes women can be discriminated as a class, and they themselves can also feel somehow unworthy because if you hear a certain thing for enough times, you start to believe it. So, and it's one thing that having someone else make you feel bad, but when your own self-confidence is shattered, it can be a real hindrance, not only to your spiritual progress, but to your overall health, physical and mental well-being. So personally, whenever I see comments in the Sastra about the intelligence or trustworthiness of women, I always think of the following. So there's a few things I think of. So I always think, number one, how Prabhupada viewed and acted towards his female disciples. And by Krishna's grace, I saw Prabhupada many times. I had interactions with a lot of his senior female disciples, and I often discussed different things, how Prabhupada cared. And when I prepared, I created a seminar called The Importance of Women in ISKCON. So I did a lot of research and interviews, informal interviews, and I gleaned a pretty good view of how Prabhupada viewed and acted towards his female disciples. And then my second thing that I think is that, well, whenever there's a bit of a disparaging comment about women in the Sastra, then I think there's actually more disparaging comments about men having been made about men in the Sastra. So far more damaging, far more disparaging than some of those comments. Now, whether that would fly in the face of, logical discourse, I don't know, but it works for me. And then the other point that I think of is that, you can extract certain comments in the scripture to serve your purpose, but you're ignoring the other sastric comments that state the opposite. Just like this verse, for instance, right? Someone can quote, oh, women are, 9 times more lusty, or women are, less intelligent, can't be trusted, etc., etc. But they take those verses out of context. And when you look at this verse, Krishna himself is saying that these feminine qualities are, and the list of the 7. And then, sometimes Chanakya Pandit is quoted. Now, I always sarcastically allude to Chanakya Pandit as our friend Chanakya Pandit. And Prabhupada did quote him, for sure. He did quote him. But one has to keep in mind that Chanakya Pandit wasn't a spiritualist. He was a canny advisor to the king. And, Prabhupada did quote him. But in a letter Prabhupada wrote to Nehru in 1952, he says the following, and I'll read this out to you. Prabhupada speaking here, writing here. Even the famous Chanakya Pandit, who was the Prime Minister of India during the reign of Chandragupta, used to live in a cottage and draw no salary from the state. It's nice historical information. Such simple habits did not deteriorate his high intelligence and dignity, and as such, he had compiled many useful literatures which are read by millions for social and political guidance. So in other words, he was a political and social commentator. He wasn't a spiritualist.
A little bit different to being a sage or a rishi, isn't it? It's a
yes.
different, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely right, Abhidaya. And I once asked one of our sannyasi scholars, highly regarded scholar, sannyasi, and I said, so, like there's many comments that we see in the scriptures that are pretty negative towards women. And he said, well, you've got to keep in mind that it's a very patriarchal system. So when we have discussions like this and interviews like this, then we can, I believe, we can put things into a balance. Yes. We've still got slide 3 up. So we're looking at this verse here. So when Krishna refers to the 7 opulences, and Abhidaya, you're beautiful at Sanskrit. Would you like to recite the Sanskrit for that? I'm sure you'll do it much more nicely than I.
Oh, wow. Okay, sure. Okay. Mrutyasavasharachaham udbhavascha bhavishyatam kīrtiḥ śrīr nārīṇāṁ smṛtir medhā dhṛtiḥ kṣamā.
Thank you,
Please
Abhi.
excuse me.
Sorry, right on the spot there. You didn't know I was going to ask you that. And I
No.
didn't realize I was going to ask you that either. But thank you so much. That was beautiful. So when Krishna refers to the 7 opulences with fame, fortune, fine speech, memory, intelligence, steadfastness, and patience, it's really important to note that these qualities are feminine, not because of a grammatical convention of ascribing feminine nouns rather in Sanskrit. But the word nārīṇāṁ is really critical here, and which means of women. So yeah, for sure. And you teach Sanskrit, so you would know more than I, but there are definitely feminine nouns in Sanskrit. But Krishna is saying that among women, I am these qualities. And he's saying that not just because of a feminine principle or a feminine grammatical form in Sanskrit. And Baladev Vidyabhushan Thakur's commentary to this verse, he says explicitly that Krishna is referring to demigoddesses who are his opulences. Quote, among women, the 7 listed here, starting with kīrtiḥ, are my vibhutis. They are deities. And closing quote. And he continues that if one possesses even a portion of these qualities, they become glorious. So these qualities are embodied in these demigoddesses who are energies or opulence of Krishna himself. They're actually real live women. And it's not
Wow.
just a Sanskrit convention attributing feminine qualities.
Yeah, it's not just like a grammatical rule, like, oh, it's a feminine noun, so therefore it's feminine. It actually goes beyond that. They're personified as deities, is what you're saying.
Yes, they're his vibhuti. So you've got memory, you've got medhā, intelligence, dhṛtiḥ, firmness, kṣamā, patience. And then I'm quoting Baladev Vidyabhushan's commentary here, and he says, among women, the 7 listed here, starting with kīrtiḥ, are my vibhutis. They are deities. Just by possessing a reflection of their qualities, men become praiseworthy. Men used in the humankind reference become praiseworthy. Kīrtiḥ means fame because of good qualities like religiosity. So when you examine these qualities, you can see how emotional intelligence and intellectual application found in women embraces many of these beautiful qualities. And, we're not saying, or I'm not saying, at least, men and women are the same. No, men and women are different. They have their different psyche, they have their different way, their different psychology, they have different ways of applying things. But, in the women that I've seen, how they perform in their household duties, in their service duties, in how they care and nurture, their qualities are very good. So we could go into slide 4. And I think I've discussed enough of that. We'll go into slide 4.
Beautiful. So following on from that, how can we relate these qualities, how they're described here, to the women and the Vaishnavis in our movement? We've got this verse. How does that then apply to the Vaishnavis and women in our movement?
Yeah, so I'll touch on a few of those qualities and how those qualities resonate with the modern lens before we pivot to the topic of the day, which is intelligence. So these demigoddesses, they embody some very wonderful qualities as described in this verse, and how I understand that they relate to women, particularly Vaishnavi women. So I've picked out a couple of them. I won't talk about it at length because that's a topic for some other fortunate speaker. But let's look at kīrtiḥ, fame. So Prabhupada said that women actually are more pious than men, and they bring religiosity into the family. And he used the example that during the Second World War, women gathered in the churches to pray to God, to please protect their husbands, their families, their sons. So we can see that natural inclination all throughout, that women have that propensity naturally to follow the Lord's path. and encourage their children to be devotional. You yourself have that wonderful Bhakti Kids Sangha. And, you know, we can see even with our grandchildren, well, my grandchildren, you're too young to have grandkids, but with my grandkids, you can just see how it's like that natural inclination. And I have mostly granddaughters, so I see that devotion in them. And after all, as the Sastra explains, that mother is the first guru. You know, she's creating the child in her body, and she's the one that is teaching the child up to at least the age of 5, you know, and she's also the linchpin of the family and of society. And there's many verses, which I won't talk about now, how the woman's role is glorified. And if the woman isn't protected and respected and cared for, then the society is a complete write-off. It's very, very dangerous to neglect women. And then let's look at śrīr, wealth in areas of dharma, artha, kama. So in first canto, chapter 9, verse 25 to 29, chapter 9, verse 25 to 29 in the first canto, we've got Bhishma's instructions to Maharaj Yudhishthira, a very beautiful section of Bhagavatam. And in that verse, it quotes how women are accepted as the power of inspiration to men. And as such, women are more powerful than men. So, you know, that is wonderful. Like for any ladies who feel, oh, I'm neglected in the society is too patriarchal, you know, they're always knocking women. Forget about those disparaging comments. You focus on comments like this from Bhishma Dev, the most illustrious Bhishma Dev. He's saying that women are accepted as the power of inspiration to men, and as such, they're more powerful. And then they inspire the husband to follow dharma or devotional practices. I've seen in so many grihasta homes, it's the wife that's the driving force in encouraging.
Agree.
Yeah,
I've seen it in my service too, that it's usually the mother that instigates the morning program or like the devotional activities of the children, and the husband may get involved, but it's the mother who initiates and plans it. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I would agree with you. So they inspire their husband, their children to follow dharma or devotional practices. They encourage and they often co-provide economic stability to the family. So it's pretty rare where in these modern times, especially in the West, with ridiculous prices of houses or rental, if you're lucky to find a rental, is that they often work just as hard as the husbands to provide economic stability. And it's very rare where a wife or a mother keep the house neat and tidy and not work. Mostly it's a major juggle where these women are working either full-time or part-time. They're not only helping, you know, co-provide economic stability, but they're the pivot point. They're the strength. They're the inspiration, like Bhishma Dev said. And not only that, but they bring beauty and aesthetics to their environments. You know, that's very important. It's not to be dismissed as frivolous, because that when the home is clean, where it's nice arrangements, it doesn't have to be a flash home, it doesn't have to be a 6-bedroom, 4-bathroom mansion, that whatever home that Krishna has provided us, we keep it clean, we keep it neat, we find some, you know, nice flowers or something, to even some greenery to ornament the place. And it's not frivolous, because when the family home is a shelter and it's a sanctified place, because you have the deities there, you have, you know, the offerings.
Well, they're
So
maintaining they're maintaining the ashram, aren't they? They're maintaining. It's a really important
absolutely.
service, maintaining the ashram, because it provides so much motivation and inspiration to the rest of the family as well, and helps to keep them spiritually minded. So it's a huge
Yes,
service, really.
absolutely right. Absolutely right. So in all the other qualities, we can relate them to not just these particular demigoddesses, but how they are reflected in the nature of women, especially in reference to Vaishnavis, devotees of the Lord. So Śrīr means wealth in areas of Dharma, Artha, Kama, Kama as in Kama, and it also means effulgence of the body. So in Bhagavatam 4:21-4, we read, when thus protected, women as a class remain an always auspicious source of energy to the man. And this was particularly in relationship to Kumaris, or untouched young girls. You know, they provide a great source of energy. You know, the father's very proud of his chaste daughter, etc. And in Bhagavatam, 3rd canto, chapter 14, verse 20, there's this beautiful verse, and it's all about how the wife is the fort. So the body is the fort. The wife is supposed to be the commander of the fort, and therefore, whenever there is an attack on the body by the senses, it is the wife who protects the body from being smashed. So the husband's body or the man's body is likened to the fort, and the wife is the commander of that fort. So when men disrespect that, let alone shock horror, use violence against that commander of the fort, they're pretty much destroying their spiritual life, totally, let alone their punya, their pious activities, let alone their good virtue. So as a fort commander very easily conquers invading plunderers, by taking shelter of a wife, one can conquer the senses, which are unconquerable in the other social orders. So these are just references I've put in here for the glorification of women, and for us women to appreciate ourselves too. Yes, we can offer these things. And if you're not married, then you offer to, you know, immediate family or the ISKCON family. So it's best not for me to drill down into these other qualities further, because other panel speakers will be focusing on those. However, I just thought these served as an example of what I was saying earlier, that the emotional intelligence and intellectual application found in women embraces many of these beautiful qualities, very many.
I think it's
So
beautiful what you were saying about hoping to, you know, encourage Vaishnavis to come forward in sharing this information, because, you know, I have found sometimes when you approach Vaishnavis for a project, there's a little bit of apprehension sometimes about putting themselves forward. So I think these kind of illuminating talks where you discuss the qualities and how they relate to us and bring it alive, I think is really, really helpful for the Vaishnavis watching.
Yeah, and we can do a lot more service when we have self-confidence.
Yes.
Not to think, oh, I'm unworthy, I'm stupid, I'm less intelligent. You know, these things, they're all material, right?
Yeah.
So we'll examine that. So we're looking at this slide here, amazing brain slide. Let's have a look at that.
I've got the brain slide up. Would you like me to move along, or?
Yes, well, you can ask me a question about that if you like.
Beautiful. So, beautiful. We're staying on the brain slide. It's such a cool picture, bringing the science and the sastra together. This is a topic that has been discussed rigorously throughout ISKCON, hasn't it? We've gone back and forth. How would you describe intelligence in women, Krishnarupa? We're given all of your, you know, as we went through in your bio, how many services you've done relating to this, you know, how much community service you do and devotee care that you do. You interact so much with Vaishnavis. How do you describe the intelligence of women?
Well, it's such a broad topic, the intelligence of women. I mean, looking at this slide, I mean, it's very complicated, the brain, isn't it? And of course, I don't profess to have a proper understanding of the brain. if you ask me a question about the different segments on that slide, I go, well, it's a fascinating topic, and I thought this slide looked pretty good, so I chose this one. But the experts tell us that there are different understandings of intelligence. And when I was a journalist and worked in publishing, I would have to write on topics that I had no idea about. But by doing research and the interviews and exploring the topics, it's amazing how, you can pick up so many things, So it's sometimes we're autodidacts. We just learn, by ourselves and with research, etc. So the experts tell us that there are different understandings of intelligence overall. So there's cognitive, there's emotional, and there's linear. So I'm just going to run through some of these briefly. So cognitive intelligence is referred to as human mental ability, and understanding developed through thinking, experiences, and senses. So there's the thought, there's experiences, and then there's the 5 senses. So cognitive means the ability to generate knowledge by using existing information. It also includes other intellectual functions such as attention, learning, memory, judgment, and reasoning. So then when we look at emotional intelligence, and that's often referred to as EQ, or the emotional quotient, is ability to understand, use, and manage your own emotions in a positive way to relieve stress, communicate effectively, empathize with others, overcome challenges, and diffuse conflict. And ladies, in my experience, have very high emotional intelligence in general. And with this emotional intelligence, it helps you build stronger relationships, succeed at work, at school, achieve your career and personal goals. It can also help you to connect with your feelings, turn intention into action, and make informed decisions about what matters most to you. And then this emotional intelligence is broken into 4 commonly defined attributes. So in emotional intelligence, you've got self-management. So you're able to control impulsive feelings and behaviors, manage your emotions in healthy ways, take initiative, follow through on commitments, and to adapt to changing circumstances. And we know as parents, you may feel like strangling your children, shock horror, but you control how you behave. You manage your emotions. Isn't that right, Abhidaya?
Very, very interesting point that you're making. I'm thinking, when we hear of even the reactive crime rates, I mean, we very much see that the perpetrators are usually by and large majority men, right? And it sounds like it's because we have better control over our initial reactions and impulses. We're able to rationalize and use our emotional intelligence to break that down before maybe giving a reaction. And I think that's, I mean, obviously crime statistics are an extreme end, but it's just interesting that we see one gender reflected more in it, more there because of that reaction, or that maybe lesser ability to regulate a reaction at the time. And I agree, Krishnarupa, through my services, that they're very good at de-escalating and negotiating and being, first-class diplomats.
Yes. And we can see, looking at the statistics of domestic and family violence, of course, that's mostly perpetrated by males. Sad to say, not that women can't be perpetrators of domestic and family violence, but statistically, it's mostly a male perpetrated crime. So, and it's interesting sometimes because, you hear men say sometimes, oh, she's so emotional, she's just a woman, oh, emotional woman. And, of course, we are more sensitive generally, and, more concerned about other people's welfare. And our skins might not be as thick, but they're not. And if men treat women properly, then, emotions are much more steady. So with this emotional intelligence, there's also self-awareness. So you recognize your own emotions and how they affect your thoughts and behavior. There's more of an analytical point of view. Sometimes, you can go, oh, look, I'm getting a bit, my emotions are getting a bit out of control here. I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed. Take a deep breath, walk away, come back when you're calm. So, you know your strengths and your weaknesses and have self-confidence if your emotional intelligence is high. Then there's two more. There's categories. There's social awareness. So you have empathy. You can understand the emotions, the needs, and concerns of other people, and you pick up on emotional cues. You feel comfortable socially and recognize the power dynamics in a group or organization. And then the final one is relationship management. You know how to develop and maintain good relationships, communicate clearly, inspire and influence others, work well in a team, and manage conflict. So emotional intelligence has so many advantages. And then there's linear. So linear thinking is an analytical, methodic, rational, and logical thinking style. It's generally, like narrow vision.
Hones in on one thing, and it doesn't look broadly.
Yes. A linear process moves forward like a line with your starting point and an ending point. And our brains often want to make simple, straight connections in sequential order. And, I can't say that that's what the male brain is like, but it, can be a bit more linear. So Mark Oliver, he wrote in his book, A Himalayan Trinity, which I have not read, but I like this quote. He identified 4 fundamental intelligence: IQ, your intelligence quotient, EQ, your emotional intelligence, PQ, your physical intelligence, and SQ, your spiritual intelligence.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's very interesting. So when you examine these different types of intelligence, it's clear how women possess many of these different types of intelligence. They're multifunctional. They de-escalate. They look at the bigger picture. Men might be more linear in their thinking, but female intelligence, particularly in the realm of emotional intelligence, is just off the charts. And one point I'd like to make is where I see that women may fall down in intelligence. Yes, really, it's unfortunate fact that there's one thing, that we are subject to the flattery of unscrupulous men. In 5th Canto, chapter 2, verse 17, Shukadev Goswami is describing Maharaj Agnidra. Now, his intelligence was like that of a demigod, and he knew the art of flattering women to win them to his side. He therefore pleased that celestial girl with his lusty words and gained her favor. And Prabhupada writes in the purport, since King Agnidra was a devotee, he actually had no attraction for material enjoyment. But because he wanted a wife progeny, and Lord Brahma had sent Purvachiti for this purpose, he expertly pleased her with flattering words. Women are attracted by a man's flattering words. One who is expert in this art of flattery is called Vidagda. They actually have a name. So that's something that I would suggest for any female listeners, that's something that we as women need to guard against.
Yeah.
Men who use such flattery are unscrupulous. I'm not talking about, a Vaishnava male devotee will come to you and go, oh, Madhiji, that was a really nice class that you gave, or I really like the garlands you made for the deities. That's just, sincere flattery. But if someone comes up to you and says, oh, I love the color of your eyes, or wow, I love the way the sari you're wearing, it looks so beautiful on you. You've got to have your little radar alarm bells going off. So that, in my opinion, and I'd be interested to see if anyone disagrees with me, that's where the intelligence of women can show cracks, because we are subject to the flattery. You know, we have to use our intelligence and guard against it.
I think every Vaishnavi watching this right now, either at some point in their life or has a friend who they know is super intelligent, successful, runs a business or something like that, but they'll be so blind to the flattery of a particular man in their life or something. And we as the bystanders can all see that. But when they're in it, they can't see it. And I completely agree. I've seen this over and over and over again, not just in myself, but in friends, where we can succumb to that kind of flattery that you're describing, you know, and really all our emotional intelligence, all of the things that you've just outlined should protect us against that. But for some reason, our guard drops at times when these things happen. So I'm really glad that you brought that point up.
And when I came across that in Bhagavatam some years ago, I was like, that's it. And look, it's important that, you know, as like, say, for example, in my family, it was just a rule that you never complimented anyone in the family, because if you did, their thought process was, oh, you'll get a big head. So no one ever gave you encouragement. Oh, you look very nice. How's school going? Oh, yeah, that's a good job, blah, 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 blah. You know, it was none of that kind of emotional reciprocation. So I think it's very important that young girls are very much given attention by their parents, by their father. You know, the father can encourage her in so many ways. So when she grows into adulthood, she won't have this weakness when someone starts to flatter her, that they're like dried up sponges and they just embrace it because they haven't had that emotional love and encouragement when they were kids. So
I never thought about it that way, Krishnarupa, but it's a great explanation as to the root cause as to why women might react that way when they are flattered. Because we're just, you know, I look at it, you know, we're expected to help with our younger siblings. We're expected to do chores. We're expected to help in the household. And we don't ever get any sort of praise or validation for that. And then I think you're right. We then, as adults, kind of seek that out a little bit and maybe in the wrong places. But excellent points.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And, you know, it's very important that as women, we encourage and support our fellow Vaishnavis, that we give them, you know, encouragement and tell them, okay, you know, this is great what you're doing. I really love the way you're doing this service, and you know, you're inspirational because of your service attitude, and you know, you're a lot of fun, and I love being around you. Don't have to words of encouragement don't have to come from you know, a man. We can also support our fellow Vaishnavis. So I think
Very
we
good
could.
point. We're going to move on now to our next question.
Yeah.
So I was wanting to ask you, because I've heard lots of different opinions about the size of brains and the correlation between the size of the brain and the amount of intelligence a person might have or not have. So I wanted to hear from you, you know, does the size of the brain matter? Is that relevant to the amount of intelligence? What's your view on that?
Yeah, it's a really good one, isn't it? And even Prabhupada himself has said in conversations, he said, oh, 32-ounce brain. It's a really good question. And I'd like to share something that I found absolutely astounding. And my dear God sister Rukmini, wife of Anuttama Prabhu, I was talking to her about this subject a few years ago, and she informed me of this mind-boggling, excellent fact in a book she read by a neuroscientist called Dr. Luann Brizendine. And this Dr. Luann Brizendine, she's written a book called The Female Brain. I haven't yet bought it, but I am going to get it. And she confirms what Prabhupada said, that women's brains are smaller than men's. But even, and this is the really great point, but even accounting for bodily size and weight, of course, most of us are smaller than men, so naturally our brains will be smaller. but they have the same number of brain cells as men. Because of those brain cells, they're packed tighter in the brain. And she uses the example of like a corset. So
I like
probably a
that.
lot of you don't know what a corset is, but you know, in the 30s, 40s, 1950s, women were squeezed into these really tight, elastic things. You can hardly breathe. I mean, wearing corsets was not my generation even, but, you know.
Yeah.
My
Well, so
big
much so
sister.
that it would move their organs sometimes. They'd be so tight.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely horrific. But she likens that, you know, despite the weight of the brain, the same brain cells are in there. They're just packed tighter. So, you know, the size of the brain is not important, because women do have the same amount of brain cells as their male counterparts, according to this Dr. Brizendine. And Albert Einstein apparently donated his brain to science after his death. I've heard that anecdotally. I can't give you proof, like solid proof, but it turns out his brain size was actually smaller than average. And a nice analogy that I like to think of is that technology is getting smaller and more powerful. So you just look
Very
at the
true.
you
When
just
you
look at
think like cameras, phones, everything just gets smaller and
yes,
lighter, but they do more functions.
yes. And you just look at the advances in mobile phones. People even make whole movies on their iPhones, like, you know, they screen them. So
Absolutely.
I think that's, you know, no, it's not important that women, their brains may weigh less, because the brain cells are there. And you only have to look at, you know, the number of women who are involved in very, you know, intellectually challenging roles, female pilots, female CEOs, female, you know, scientists, etc. But there's a lot of, just as we have within our society in the outside macrocosm, there's also a lot of challenges for women because of, you know, repression by men. So we can go on to the next slide if you like, Abhidaya.
Beautiful. Such nice points. I really like the way you clarified that, Krishnarupa, about that the size and the weight might be different, but the amount of brain cells and neuroconnections are it's the size and the weight is not indicative of the amount of brain cells and neural connections that are actually within the brain.
Yes.
That's a really, really interesting point. I love the way that you and you brought that alive with such a nice picture. So my next question is, what was Srila Prabhupada's expectations of Vaishnavis and female disciples?
So you can see on the screen, there's this beautiful quote there where Prabhupada's talking from Adi Leela, where he says, both boys and girls are being trained to become preachers. Those girls are not ordinary girls, but are as good as their brothers who are preaching Krishna consciousness. Therefore, to engage both boys and girls in fully transcendental activities is a policy intended to spread the Krishna consciousness movement. So Prabhupada expected his female disciples to preach and practice sadhana bhakti, and to perform the same with the same enthusiasm as his male disciples. He didn't treat them as inferiors, but he treated them as good as the boys. And there's some really nice examples of this. I don't know if many of you have read Shama Shundar's book, Chasing Rhinos with the Swami, but there's a very nice quote in there in the second volume on page 289. And he writes, the very successful Jaipur program had been arranged by women, managed by women, and with the Queen of Jaipur's presence, and her name was Gayatri Maharani. The female force was behind all the activities there. And that's one example. The women were in charge of obtaining the Radha Krishna Murtis for the entire society, and were being tutored by Govindaji's priests in the arts of deity worship. So Sitala, Jamuna, and I can't think of another name, but they went to Jaipur. Because most of the deities came from Jaipur, they organized deities for the whole of our society. and they were being tutored in the arts of deity worship. And I really love this next example that I'm going to give you. My heart just filled up when I came across this, and it's once again in Shamasunda's book. And in Mayapur in February 1972, there was a packed pandal in Mayapur, and devotees, not that many, but devotees were gathered for the ground laying ceremony of Mayapur Chandrodaya Mandir. And as you know, in a ground laying ceremony, there's a very deep hole dug, and a little deity of Ananta Vishnu, generally a gold deity, is installed, placed in that foundation hole, because Anantadev supports the whole of the temple. So, and Prabhupada actually installed that deity himself. And then after that, Prabhupada asked various devotees to speak. And who did he begin with? He began with a Vaishnavi. He began with Malati. And Shamasunda writes, asking a woman to speak at such an occasion flies in the face of age-old protocol. And some of Prabhupada's godbrothers looked a little uptight, writes Shamasunda. So Srila Prabhupada had invited his godbrothers to come, because as you know, near Mayapur, there's many Gaudiya Mat temples, and many of Prabhupada's respected godbrothers were there, and he invited them to attend. So Shamasunda continues, asking a woman to speak on such an occasion flies in the face of age-old protocol. But most did seem happy to see this new chapter, incredible new chapter, opening for the deep felt faith. And then Shamasunda writes, and he's quoting Malati. And then Prabhupada says, Malati, you speak. Malati writes, or says, everybody was flawed. I was flawed. So what could I say? I'm just looking around. Here are all these learned Vaishnavas, these, esteemed sannyasis, certainly more learned than I was, she writes, or than I'd ever be, she writes. But I just stood up and I spoke about Srila Prabhupada. I was not a pundit, but I had no hesitation about speaking on the glories of Srila Prabhupada, and it was actually the right thing to do at that time. And, everyone was very happy about that. So there's Prabhupada. He could have easily got one of his senior male disciples to speak, especially because all of the Gaudiya Mat godbrothers are there, and Prabhupada would get criticized by them. Why are you allowing a woman to cook for you? Why are you allowing women to serve in your temples? But Prabhupada, the ever great visionary, like Kunta man, he picked Malati. So on the material platform, okay, there are distinctions. That's okay. It's male, female. If we need to use a bathroom, we go to the ladies' bathroom. We don't go to the men's bathroom, and vice versa. There are different functions. But Prabhupada said that these women who have taken shelter of Lord Chaitanya's mission are acting on the spiritual platform, and he gave them equal opportunities to serve. So that's the distinction. We need to always remember that Prabhupada wanted us to function on the spiritual platform. Not, so many lectures, almost every lecture Prabhupada gave, he spoke about the fact that we're spirit soul. We're not this body. But we seem to forget about that a lot. So there's Sanatan Dhamma and there's Naimittika Dhamma, which is material delineations. So Naimittika Dhamma is the function. Just like if you're a man, as I said, you use the men's bathroom, ladies use the ladies' bathroom. There is a difference in function, but that's on the material platform. So equality actually can only really be there on the spiritual platform. And, you mentioned in my bio that I worked for 20 odd years in professionally in publishing. And I could see that it was a struggle for our female CEO. She always had to prove herself to be better. She worked the hardest. So there's that inequality there in the material world. And there's always going to be someone more wealthy, more beautiful, or more intelligent. It's on the spiritual platform that there's true equality, as dasa anudas, We are eternally the servant of the servants of the Lord. So that's very important. And in Giriraj Swami's wonderful book called I'll Build You a Temple, he says, Prabhupada says, but these women, my disciples, are not ordinary women. They are preachers. They are Vaishnavas. By their association, one becomes a Vaishnava. And Prabhupada said that. He didn't say, oh, yeah, we'll just allow the girls to come in. Got to be fair, but, they're not very important. No, they were very important to Srila Prabhupada. Very, very important.
Yes, it goes beyond being tokenistic, doesn't it? I mean, these changes that he made, and I've heard that there was some some of his godbrothers didn't love all of those changes, and yet he still went ahead, and that's very brave, to do that as well in the face of your godbrothers saying maybe you shouldn't go down that road. So it's I love hearing these beautiful stories of when Prabhupada would invite up a female disciple. There's a famous one of Yamuna Devi at a pandal, and she gets asked, Srila Prabhupada asked her to come up and speak, and she starts reciting Isha Upanishad.
Yes.
And the audience had never even seen Western-bodied devotees, let alone a Western-bodied woman in a sari and a tilakam reciting Isha Upanishad. I mean, they were completely shocked. So, there's another wonderful example of a Vaishnavi using her intelligence and Prabhupada glorifying that intelligence. He could have picked anybody, but he picked, Mother Yamuna. So there's another very nice example.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama.